Good evening, everyone. I'm Frank Novak, and welcome to this Senate candidate edition of Point of Reference. Tonight, a brief glimpse of the 7 candidates running for office, Republicans, Democrats, and Independents. First up, we'll have Democrat Tim Coco, President and CEO of Coco & Company, an advertising and public relations firm, and he's also the head of WHAV Radio. He is also a candidate for the 1st Essex District in the Senate race, and welcome to the program, Tim.
Well, thank you very much, Frank.
This is your first outing.
This is my first outing as a running for public office, but it is more intimidating to be with the Dean of Haverhill Broadcasters and the President of Haverhill Rotary. Congratulations to you.
Thank you very, very much. So we'll get right into some rapid-fire questions, if we could. And first of all, I'd like to ask you some of the things that you've been talking about in your position papers and your website, and that also happen to be in the news. To stimulate economic development, you'd like to require state and local government to buy locally. Can you give me an example of that, please?
Well, I was talking to Ed Chernesky, for example, owner of Shoe City Hardware, and he told me that as a small business owner, he's very competitive on his prices, and yet he sees municipal workers with Home Depot credit cards going over the border. My view is that there needs to be, within reason, local purchases made by our cities and towns and by our state. And I think it's very important that even if there's a couple pennies difference, what is the cost to our local economy if a business closes its doors and lays off its workers?
Fair enough. But what if there's a better deal across the state line? To what degree? Because you're talking about exercising some discretion.
No, there would have to be, obviously we can't be selling $2,000 bolts like the military buys. No, obviously there are going to have to be some percentages. But keep in mind, again, the cost of lost personal property taxes and the loss of jobs in the local economy.
You'd like to eliminate irresponsible corporate giveaways that don't create jobs. Can you give us an example of something of that type?
Well, yes. Massachusetts right now, this year, gives away $5.1 billion, that's with a B, to companies that actually, many of them, ship jobs out of state. Now, the original purpose of those giveaways was to encourage job creation, encourage manufacturing within the state, and that's a very laudable goal. But as we saw last year with the Fidelity Investments and the other mutual fund companies are receiving $140 million this year alone in tax cuts. And yet they've announced shipping jobs to Rhode Island and New Hampshire. So I think it's important that we look at what they're being given, and if they're not holding up their ends of the bargain, then claw back that money, because $5.1 billion is very nearly what we need to do everything this state needs to do.
Education. If we invest more, and that's what one of your ideas happens to be, if we invest more, doesn't that mean spend more, and wouldn't that mean that taxes go up?
Well, not necessarily. The problem with the current education formula, now I'll take your viewers back 20 or more years to Proposition 2.5. Cities and towns were frozen after that ballot referendum passed, were frozen at their spending levels. And if you remember, the state stepped up to the plate, and that was the beginning of the big blast of local aid. Mm-hmm. But the formula was such that there were actually cities and towns, mostly the wealthy towns, actually trying to give the money back, that they didn't need that much money. Now, of course, in this economy, no one is saying that, but what it showed was the original problem with just throwing money at cities and towns. Some need it, some don't, but both are getting it. And it's very important that we look at the formula, and when education reform passed in the 90s, the problem was somewhat improved. The situation was somewhat improved, but it didn't address the issues. Now, you look at a city like Newburyport, really gets about $1.5 million in aid to education. Haverhill and Bethune get tens of millions of dollars. But Lawrence, I think, gets $100 million. We need to look at the formula to make sure the cities and towns that need the funds receive them and use them wisely, while taking it away from the other cities and towns that don't have the same shortfalls.
Understand. Agency consolidation. You promote for the MBTA and regional transit authorities. Can you give us an idea of how that would look and what that would save?
Well, First of all, the regional transit authorities were created, and the intention was not to harm local transportation companies, but of course that's what happened. The idea is that the regional transit authorities like Merrimack Valley Regional Transit Authority and Lowell Transit Authority were supposed to hire local bus operators. But of course a new industry came up and now many of them hire out of Ohio. Now, in our local aid, we always hear about throwing money at local aid, but there's a deduction from local aid before the cities and towns actually receive it. And some of those deductions are for regional transit authorities. And so separate transit authorities have separate administrative staffs, separate processing systems, and so on. And it may very well make sense to say combine the Merrimack Valley Regional Transit Authority and the Lowell Regional Transit Authority. In addition to that, you may have heard of the Ring and Ride. It's a program where seniors and others in need receive a ride to the doctor's office or the hospital, not an emergency situation, obviously. And what happens is we send these giant buses out to pick them up. It might actually be less expensive to send a taxi cab. And so these are the kinds of excesses that I think may be improved with consolidation.
You said that when small business owners can afford it, sometimes they can't afford insurance for themselves. How can they provide insurance for their employees? How would you try to solve that problem?
Well, the model in Massachusetts obviously become the model for the nation, but it's not perfect and it may not even be sustainable over the long term. It may very well be that we need to move to a single payer system. Vermont's dabbling with that right now, and we should study the results of that. But in any event, we've got to make insurance affordable. I spoke to a woman when I was collecting signatures, and she told me she's a small business owner, and she has a catastrophic care policy. In other words, only if the worst things happen to her family are they covered. And so they have to pay all their co-pays and so on. And she pays more than $10,000 a year for almost no coverage. That has to change. And the Massachusetts Health Connector that was designed to address that apparently isn't doing that job. So we need to look at that.
Okay, Tim Coco, thank you very much for being here. Tim Coco, running for the first Essex Senate race seat, and we wish you the best of luck.
Thank you very much, Frank.
We'll be back in just a moment. I hope that you've listened and learned in an effort to help you decide which candidate to support in the upcoming election. And on Election Day, remember to vote, because if you don't vote, you don't count, and everyone should count. And as always, we hope that this program has been a point of reference for you. And until next time, my name is Frank Novak, and thanks very much for watching.